Job's secret, every believer should know. Powerful video. Have you ever wondered why some people remain steadfast in the faith even when the world crumbles around them? Job is the perfect example of this. But beware, Job's story is not just another tale of overcoming. It is a profound revelation about faith, integrity, and God's purpose in the midst of suffering. And here's the amazing part. The most powerful lesson of Job's life lies not in the blessings he received in the end, but in the way he faced what seemed to be God's silence during his darkest trials. Perhaps you are wondering, what does Job have to do with me? The answer is everything. Like Job, you too face challenges that test your faith and put your trust in God to the test. Losses, injustices, periods of doubt, we all go through it. But the big question is, what differentiates those who overcome spiritually from those who get lost along the way? The secret is in Job's answer. And here's a shock. Many believers today cling to God because of what he does, not who he is. This is a hard but necessary truth. Job teaches us that genuine faith goes far beyond circumstances. What if I told you that there is something in Job's story that can transform the way you deal with difficulties, bring purpose to your pain, and renew your faith like never before? Get ready, because what you're about to discover is going to change your perspective. Imagine losing everything you love most in an instant, your family, your possessions, and your health. This was the devastating reality faced by Job. Still, he declared, "The Lord gave and the Lord took. Blessed be the name of the Lord." Job 1:21. How can someone pronounce these words in the midst of such immense pain? The answer lies in Job's unwavering faith, which did not depend on his circumstances, but on his confidence in God's character. And you, have you ever wondered how you would react to such an extreme situation? Maybe you've faced something like this, such as an irreparable loss or an unexpected crisis. Job teaches us that true faith is not an escape from suffering, but a shield that holds us up in the midst of it. Job's faith reveals a precious lesson. It was not based on what God did for him, but on who God was. Often, our confidence is shaken when blessings cease. We ask, why did God allow this to me? But faith isn't about having all the answers. It's about trusting even when questions go unresolved. Remember what the Apostle Paul wrote? "We know that in all things God works for the good of those who love him." Romans 8:28. This does not mean that suffering is good, but that God can use it to shape something greater in our lives. Job also shows us that faith does not exclude pain. He tore his garments, grieved deeply, and even wished he had never been born. Job 3:11. However, he did not sin against God with his lips. Job 1:22. This reminds us that having faith does not mean ignoring suffering, but facing it with perseverance. If you are in a time of pain, allow yourself to feel it, but maintain your trust in God. Pray even with simple words and seek comfort in the Word. Passages like Psalm 23:4, "Though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for you are with me," can bring hope in times of trouble. Job's posture reflects something rare today, a faith that is not shaken by loss. In today's world, it is common to measure life by what we have or have achieved. But Job understood that true wealth is in the relationship with God. When everything around him fell apart, he chose to cling to the eternal instead of the fleeting. Ask yourself, where is your security? If you lost everything today, would you still be able to trust that God is in control? Job is the example that faith is a solid refuge, even when all other foundations fall. An interesting detail in Job's story is that he did not know what was going on behind the scenes. Satan believed that Job's faithfulness depended on his material blessings, but God knew of his servant's integrity. Job 1:8-12. And you, have you ever realized that your life can also be a showcase for faith? Perhaps what you are facing now is an opportunity to show that your trust is not in earthly things, but in God. It's hard to see purpose in the midst of pain, but remember the words of Isaiah 55:9. As the heavens are higher than the earth, so are my ways higher than your ways. Job's suffering also teaches us that our perspective is limited. Job didn't understand the reason for his pain, but he still chose to trust. It is like trying to understand a tapestry by looking only at the wrong side. Only God sees the complete pattern. And that's a challenge, isn't it? Especially when we are in the midst of chaos. But Job invites us to step out in faith, believing that God is working for our good, even when everything seems otherwise. Reflect. How can you trust God more today, even without understanding the reason for your struggles? Job kept his faith, even though he had no guarantee that he would be restored. This is so powerful. We, on the other hand, have the advantage of knowing the end of the story. Job was blessed beyond what he could have imagined. Job 42:10-17. It reminds us that God is faithful and always keeps his promises. When you feel like there's no way out, look back and see how faithful God has already been in your life. Like Job, you too can find the strength to endure. Meditate on Jeremiah 29:11. I myself know the thoughts I have about you, thoughts of peace and not of evil, to give you a future and a hope. In the end, Job's story is a reminder that unwavering faith does not guarantee a trouble-free life, but it does ensure that God is always in control. Job faced unimaginable suffering, but he stood firm. Little did he know that all of this prepared him for a profound spiritual transformation. And the question that remains is, what can we learn from Job's integrity? This is something that will only reveal itself as we move forward in the story. Job's integrity was tested in unimaginable ways. Satan, defying God, suggested that Job's faithfulness only existed because of the blessings he received. Job 1:9-11. God allowed Job to be tested, but on one condition: his life could not be touched. Even after losing everything, Job did not sin against God or assign blame to him. Job 1:22. This teaches us that integrity is revealed in adversity, not in quiet days. It is easy to be right when all is well, but true character manifests itself when we face difficulties. Job challenges us to reflect. How do we react when our circumstances test our values and faith? What makes Job's integrity so extraordinary is his resistance to outside voices. His wife, faced with so much suffering, suggested that he curse God and die. Job 2:9. It may seem like cruel speech, but it is also a reflection of human pain. Job, however, wisely replied, "You speak like a fool. Will we accept God's good and not evil?" Job 2:10. This is the kind of integrity that doesn't allow itself to be shaped by pressure from others. How many times are we influenced by the opinion of others and compromise our values? Job teaches us to stay focused, even when the people around us don't understand our faith. Integrity also means being honest with yourself and with God. Job, even if he was upright, did not mask his emotions or deny his pain. He lamented, questioned, and cried out to God for answers. Job 3:11. This proves that integrity is not about appearing perfect, but about being authentic before God. Have you ever given yourself the freedom to be vulnerable in prayer? Sometimes we think we need to present a strong facade, but God prefers sincere hearts. Try opening your heart, as Job did, and see how it strengthens your connection to the divine. Satan believed that without his blessings, Job would abandon his faith. But Job proved that his integrity was not tied to what he had, but to who God was. He was a man who understood that character is non-negotiable. Today, we live in a society that often trades principles for convenience. At work, in relationships, or even in small commitments, it's tempting to give in. But Job reminds us that even when all seems lost, integrity is what remains. And you, how have you protected your character in the small and big decisions of life? Integrity can also be a powerful testimony to others. The Bible says that Job was a blameless man, upright, fearing God and shunning evil. Job 1:1. This description did not come from friends or family, but from God himself. Imagine having your life praised by the Creator. This leads us to reflect, what would God say about our journey? Job teaches us that integrity does not need human applause. It is seen and honored by God. So how can we live in a way that reflects the divine presence in us? Even when unjustly accused by his friends, Job did not abandon his integrity. They insisted that their suffering was the result of some hidden sin, Job 4:7-9, but Job maintained his stance. He knew he wasn't perfect, but he wasn't guilty of what he was accused of either. This steadfastness teaches us not to allow erroneous judgments to distract us from what we know to be right. Think about how you handle unfair criticism. Job shows that responding with integrity is always the best choice, even when it seems difficult. Job also teaches us that integrity is directly linked to wisdom. He discerned that not everything his friends said was true. In Proverbs 4:7, we are reminded, "Wisdom is the chief thing, acquire wisdom." Having integrity is not only about doing what is right, but also about seeking understanding. Are you cultivating wisdom in your life? Reading the Word, seeking wise counsel, and reflecting on your decisions are all practical ways to nurture this virtue. Finally, Job shows us that integrity is rewarded, but not without undergoing trial. God allowed him to be tested because he trusted his character. Imagine this, God trusting you to be a living testimony of faith and resilience. Job did not yet know it, but his integrity would pave the way for a restoration greater than he could have imagined. What else does your story teach us about the role of friendship in trials? Perhaps this will only become clearer in the next chapter of his journey. When Job lost everything, his friends Eliphaz, Bildad, and Zophar demonstrated a powerful gesture of empathy. They came to him, sat in silence for 7 days and 7 nights, sharing his grief. Job 2:13. This initial act reminds us that many times words are unnecessary in the face of suffering. Being present is the greatest comfort we can offer. Think of someone who is going through a difficult time in their life. Have you ever considered simply being there without feeling the pressure to say something? The silent presence, just as Job's friends did in the beginning, can speak more than 1,000 words. However, the story changes tone when the friends start talking. Eliphaz, the first to speak up, suggests that Job's suffering is a consequence of his sins. Job 4:7-9. This, while it may seem like an attempt at consolation, carries an implicit judgment. How many times when trying to help do we end up making the situation worse with misdirected advice? Job shows us that not all counsel is helpful, and not all help is beneficial. It is a reminder to be wise in our words, offering comfort rather than criticism, especially in times of trial. Bildad and Zophar follow the same line of accusation, insisting that Job must have made some mistake to deserve such pain. But in doing so, they ignore their friend's genuine suffering. This behavior warns us of the danger of being quick to judge. How many times do we see someone struggling, and instead of offering support, we wonder what they did to get there? Job challenges us to cultivate true friendship, which seeks to understand before judging. A practical attitude: before advising, ask, "How can I help you now?" The mistake of Job's friends also teaches us about the importance of wisdom in friendships. They believed they were upholding divine justice by accusing him, but in fact, they were showing a limited understanding of God and His will. Instead, they should have followed the counsel of Proverbs 17:17. A friend loves at all times. He is a brother in adversity. Job needed support, not sermons. This makes us think, are we friends who edify or who burden those who are already suffering? Job, even in the midst of suffering, was not intimidated by the judgments of his friends. He responded to each accusation firmly, defending his integrity and seeking answers directly from God. This shows us that even surrounded by misdirected counsel, we must remain true to the truth we know. Job knew that his situation was not the result of a hidden sin, as they claimed. The next time you face unfair criticism, remember Job's courage and choose to respond wisely and calmly. The role of friends in times of trial also highlights the value of discernment. Not all advice, no matter how well-intentioned, should be followed. Job discerned that the words of his friends did not reflect God's heart. This brings us to an important point. When in doubt, seek advice that is in line with the word. As it is written in James 1:5, if any of you lacks wisdom, let him ask of God who gives to all freely and willingly. This is the kind of discernment that guides us through difficult times. The story of Job's friends also alerts us to a painful truth. Not everyone who approaches us in difficult times is ready to help us. Eliphaz, Bildad, and Zophar started out with good intentions, but they ended up being another burden to Job. This does not mean that we should distrust everyone, but that we should seek friendships that bring edification and support. If you are facing trials, ask God to put the right people on your side. Sometimes, a single wise friend can make all the difference. Ultimately, Job's friends became an important part of his journey, not because of their wisdom, but because they revealed something greater, the need to look to God for answers to the deepest questions. Job learned that even in the face of wrong counsel and unjust judgment, his trust should be in the Lord. And by reaching that point, he paved the way for a divine revelation that would completely transform his perspective. But what would Job learn from crying out directly to God? This brings us to the next chapter of his story. When Job, at the height of his anguish, cried out for answers, he was not given human explanations, but something much greater. God spoke directly to him. The Creator's voice echoed from a whirlwind, not to give justifications, but to reveal his wisdom and majesty. Job 38:1-4. God questioned him, "Where were you when I laid the foundations of the earth?" This question was not an act of superiority, but an invitation for Job to understand the divine vastness and recognize that even when logic fails, God remains in control. How many times do we seek answers, and instead God gives us insight into who He is? Job teaches us that understanding of circumstances may be limited, but confidence in God's character is unlimited. The divine discourse confronts Job with questions that highlight his inability to comprehend the complexity of creation. Job 38:12-18. Imagine the impact of this, a man small in the face of the immensity of the universe, being reminded that the same God who controls the skies and seas is also present in his pain. It's a powerful lesson in humility. Sometimes we want quick fixes and straightforward answers, but God offers us something more precious, an eternal perspective. When we face trials, it is helpful to ask, how can this situation lead me to know the Creator more deeply? God not only questioned Job, but also highlighted his meticulous care for all creation. He mentioned the feeding of ravens and the life cycle of wild animals. Job 38:39-41, 39:1-4. Showing that his attention to detail is unparalleled. If God takes such good care of creatures, how much more of us, who are made in his image? It is as Jesus taught in Matthew 6:26, "Look at the birds of the air. They do not sow or reap or store in barns, yet the Heavenly Father feeds them." This reflection challenges us to trust that even when we don't see it, God is working on our behalf. Job realized that his questions were not as important as the revelation of who God is. He declared, "My ears had heard of thee, but now mine eyes have seen thee." Job 42:5. That moment was transformative. Job went from a man searching for answers to someone who found spiritual renewal by experiencing God's presence. This shows us that many times, what we need most are not explanations, but encounters. Have you ever thought about how a moment of intimacy with God can transform your view of what you are facing? Take time to pray and meditate on passages such as Psalm 46:10. Be still and know that I am God. God did not ignore Job's pain, but used his questions to reveal his sovereignty. At no point did he directly explain the reason for Job's suffering, but that didn't diminish the depth of the answer. This contrast challenges us to reflect. Are we looking for reasons or looking for God's presence in the midst of struggles? Job learned that when we know God's heart, circumstances become secondary. Think about it. What situations can you deliver today, relying more on God's character than on answers? The dialogue between God and Job reminds us that human wisdom is limited. Even the best advice or the most elaborate arguments can never compare to divine revelation. This does not mean that we should ignore logic or the pursuit of knowledge, but rather recognize that in the end, God is the source of all truth. As it is written in Proverbs 3:5-6, trust in the Lord with all your heart, and do not lean on your own understanding. Acknowledge the Lord in all your ways, and he will direct your paths. This verse echoes Job's experience, showing that true peace comes from trust. After God's speech, Job responded with humility and repentance, saying, I am unworthy. How can I respond to you? I put my hand over my mouth. Job 40:4. He realized that his complaints were insignificant before the greatness of God. This attitude is a reminder that true wisdom begins with reverence. Have you ever experienced silencing your soul before God, even in the midst of doubts? This moment of stillness can be more transformative than any explanation we seek. Divine revelation marked a new chapter in Job's journey. He had undergone a profound spiritual transformation, but there was still something to come: restoration. Not only had God led him to a greater understanding of his sovereignty, but he was about to demonstrate his justice and goodness in surprising ways. What happens when unwavering faith and integrity are rewarded? The answer was ahead of Job, and it may also be ahead of him. After a long journey of pain and trials, Job experienced a turning point. God, who had allowed his suffering, now acted to restore him. The Bible tells us that after Job prayed for his friends, the Lord changed his fortunes and gave him twice as much as he had before. Job 42:10. This detail is significant. The restoration came after Job interceded for those who criticized him unjustly. It's a powerful reminder that healing often begins when we choose to forgive. Have you ever thought about how releasing forgiveness can open unexpected doors in your life? Job's restoration was not just material, she also involved her relationships. His brothers, sisters, and former acquaintances who had previously been far away came back to him and comforted him. Job 42:11. This highlights God's power to reconcile and restore connections that seemed lost. How many times have you thought that a relationship had no solution? Job shows us that God not only restores what we have lost, but also transforms what seemed irreparable. Have you ever surrendered your broken relationships into God's hands? The abundance that God bestowed upon Job was impressive. He received twice as much as he had before: sheep, camels, oxen, and donkeys. Job 42:12. It reminds us that God is able to bless beyond what we imagine, even after periods of loss. However, Job's greatest blessing was not his restored wealth, but the renewal of his faith and encounter with God. It is a valuable lesson. Temporal blessings are temporary, but spiritual growth is eternal. Ask yourself, am I seeking only material restoration or also a spiritual transformation? One of the most exciting aspects of Job's story is his new family. God gave him 7 more sons and 3 daughters. and the latter are described as the fairest in all the earth. Job 42:13-15. The inclusion of daughters in the inheritance, something rare in the culture of the time, demonstrates Job's righteous and renewed character. This reminds us that in God, even social norms can be transformed to reflect His justice. What areas in your life need this transformation that only God can bring? Job's restoration also shows us that God's timing is perfect. Job lived another 140 years after his trials, seeing up to the fourth generation of his descendants. Job 42:16. This teaches us that God works on a timeline that is much larger than our own. Often we want immediate answers and solutions, but the story of Job invites us to trust that at the right time, God will act. Think of something you've been waiting for a long time. What if this period was a preparation for something bigger than you imagine? The moment of restoration in Job's life challenges us to reflect on how we view God's blessings. He not only gives back what we've lost, but often gives us something even better: a deeper faith, a renewed perspective, and a restored life. Remember the words of Ephesians 3:20, "He who is able to do infinitely more than all that we ask or think, according to His power that works in us." Job is a living example of this truth. Job also teaches us that even in suffering, God never loses control. The complete restoration of your life proves that God's plan always has a purpose, even when we can't see it. The pain Job faced shaped him, transformed his view of God, and prepared him for a future he could not imagine. This makes us wonder, how are the challenges we face today preparing us for what God has in store? Finally, Job's story closes his journey of suffering with a powerful testimony of faith, perseverance, and restoration. But his story isn't just about the happy ending. It is about the God who walks with us at every step, transforming pain into purpose. Job shows us that God is faithful and that there is a purpose even in the darkest situations. But what do we learn about this journey when we look at the wisdom and friendship that manifested along the way? Perhaps there is still more to discover. Now that you have known the depths of Job's story, it is impossible not to wonder, what will you do with this knowledge? Job showed us that true faith does not depend on blessings, but on an unshakable confidence in God's character. And here's the key point. No matter what you're facing right now, a loss, a betrayal, a daunting diagnosis, there's something grand waiting for you when you decide to persevere, just as Job did. So think about it. Have you been living your faith in a superficial way, based only on what God can do for you? Or are you willing to take a step deeper, trusting in who He is, even when everything seems uncertain? What is stopping you from completely surrendering your pains and struggles to God today? Maybe it's the fear of not finding answers, or the feeling that you're alone. But remember, God was always by Job's side, even in silence. The big question is, are you ready to live out this unwavering faith that turns suffering into purpose and trials into testimony? Job teaches us that it's not just about surviving storms, but coming out of them stronger, wiser, and more connected with God. Start today. Take time to pray. Ask God for wisdom and confidence to face your challenges, and allow Him to work in your heart. And now, a special request. If you want to continue learning and growing spiritually, subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications. Thus, you will never miss content like this, which can transform your walk of faith. God has something amazing in store for you, and I can't wait to share more about it. Let's go together.